In the brutal heat of the savannah, a lioness collapsed in the sand, still in labor, still trying, but losing the fight breath by breath. Her body trembled with a final contraction, and then went terrifyingly still. A few steps away stood Kalo, the dominant male of the territory. He didn't roar, he didn't charge, he didn't even blink. He just stared into the empty horizon, like he was waiting for someone who didn't exist. Then the most impossible thing happened. Kalo turned toward the dirt road and walked straight into the open, exposing himself, risking everything just to be seen. As if a wild king had only one message left: help her. By the time the rescue truck crested the rise, the lioness had stopped breathing for seconds at a time. And when the team got close enough to see what was happening beneath her trembling belly, they froze. Because something was coming, something that shouldn't have been there, something that could take her life in 1 minute and change Kalo forever in the next. The savannah was already awake, but nothing moved the way it should have. Heat pressed down on the land like a weight, flattening the grass and dulling the wind until even the insects seemed unsure whether to make a sound. In a shallow hollow between sun-bleached rocks, the lioness lay on her side, her flanks tightening in uneven waves. The labor had started before dawn. It should have been over by now. Each contraction came slower than the last, stealing more strength than it gave back. Her paws dug weakly into the sand, claws scraping without force, as if her body remembered what to do, but no longer had the power to finish it. A low sound slipped from her throat, not a roar, not even a call, just a breath forced out under pain. A few meters away, Kalo stood still. He was a massive presence against the flat horizon, his shadow stretching long across the ground. This was his territory, a place where nothing challenged him without consequence. Yet now, his power seemed useless. He paced once, then stopped, lowered his head, lifted it again. His eyes never left the lioness. Another contraction hit. Her body tightened, trembled, then sagged back into the sand. Time dragged. The sun climbed higher. Something was wrong. Kalo took a step closer, careful, deliberate. He nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, not hard enough to move her, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. For a moment, her ear twitched, then nothing. Her breathing grew shallow, irregular, the pauses between each rise of her chest stretching longer than they should have. This was no longer just birth. This was a fight she was losing. Kalo lifted his head and scanned the open land. No rival males, no scavengers, just empty distance and shimmering heat. The kind of silence that comes before something breaks. He exhaled slowly, a deep sound from his chest. Not anger, not warning. Fear. Somewhere far beyond the tall grass and dirt tracks, the world went on as if nothing was happening. But here, in this exposed patch of earth, a line was being crossed. Life balanced on seconds, and Kalo, a king with no command left to give, stood at the edge of it, watching, waiting, as the first signs of real danger settled in. The sun continued its slow climb, turning the air heavier with every passing minute. Heat shimmered above the ground, bending the horizon into something unreal, as if the land itself was losing focus. The lioness shifted weakly, her body searching for a position that might ease the pain, but there was none. Another contraction came, then another. Each one arrived without strength, like an echo of what her body was meant to do. Her muscles tightened, paused, and released without progress. No new life, no relief, just exhaustion settling deeper into her bones. Kalo noticed it before anything else. He had witnessed births before. He knew the rhythm, the surge, the struggle, the release. This was different. There was no rhythm here, only hesitation, only delay. His tail flicked once sharply, then stilled. His ears tilted forward, catching every strained breath she managed to pull in. He circled her slowly, never turning his back on the open land. Instinct told him to guard, to watch for threats, but his attention kept snapping back to her rising and falling chest, to the way the pauses between breaths were stretching longer than before. too long. The lioness let out a low sound, barely audible. Her head lifted an inch off the sand, then dropped back down. Dust clung to her whiskers. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then closed again as if the effort alone cost too much. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Kalo stepped closer, lowering his massive frame beside her. He pressed his flank gently against her body, offering what warmth and stability he could. For a moment, she leaned into the contact. Her breathing steadied, just slightly, then it faltered again. Seconds passed, maybe more. Kalo couldn't tell. Time had begun to stretch, losing its shape. The savannah felt too quiet now, like every sound had been pulled back, waiting. He lifted his head abruptly, scanning the distance. Still nothing. No movement, no answer. Just heat and empty space. His jaw tightened. A deep, restrained rumble formed in his chest, but never escaped his throat. This was no longer a question of patience. The lioness's abdomen tightened once more, harder this time, her claws digging weakly into the sand. Her body strained, held, and then gave way. The effort drained out of her all at once. Her chest barely rose. Kalo froze. Something inside him shifted, an instinct colliding with something else, something unfamiliar. He wasn't facing an enemy. He wasn't defending territory. He was watching life slip sideways, away from the path it should have followed. And for the first time since the labor began, the truth settled in with terrifying clarity. If nothing changed soon, waiting would no longer be enough. The air grew thicker as the morning wore on, pressing against the savannah until every breath felt earned. Shadows shortened, retreating beneath stones and dry grass, leaving the lioness exposed beneath the rising sun. Her body no longer shifted on its own. It lay where it had fallen, stretched and trembling, as if movement itself had become too great a demand. Kalo stayed close now, too close to patrol, too close to hunt. His world had narrowed to the slow, fragile rise of her chest. Another long pause passed, then another. When her breath finally came, it arrived shallow and uneven, like something dragged back from a place it didn't want to leave. Kalo's ears snapped forward, his muscles tensed, not to attack, not to flee, but to be ready for something he couldn't name. This was the point he had never reached before. Birth was supposed to turn. Pain was meant to break and release. But here, nothing turned, nothing released. The rhythm he trusted had vanished, replaced by silence and waiting. The lioness shuddered suddenly, her abdomen tightening hard. Sand sprayed weakly beneath her claws as her body strained one more time. For a heartbeat it looked like progress, like life forcing its way forward. Then it stopped. Her body slackened all at once, the tension draining away as if someone had cut a line. Her head rolled slightly to the side. Her chest barely moved. Kalo froze where he stood. The savannah seemed to hold its breath with him. Even the wind fell away, leaving a heavy stillness that pressed in from every direction. This wasn't rest. This wasn't recovery. This was the dangerous space between effort and collapse. Kalo stepped forward and lowered his massive head beside hers. He touched his nose to her cheek, then to her neck, searching for movement, for warmth, for any sign that she was still anchored to the world. Her skin was hot beneath his muzzle, but life felt distant, slipping. A deep sound rumbled in his chest, low and strained. Not a roar, not a warning. It was the sound of something breaking inward. He lifted his head abruptly and looked out across the open land again. For the first time, he didn't scan for rivals or threats. He searched the emptiness itself, as if the answer might rise out of the heat and dust. Nothing came. The lioness's breathing faltered again. The space between breaths stretched longer than before, long enough to make Kalo shift his weight. Long enough to make instinct scream that this was the moment where waiting could become losing. This was no longer a slow struggle. This was the edge. And if something didn't change soon, if the world didn't intervene in some way it never had before, both lives balanced beneath the sun were about to slip past the point where strength mattered at all. Far from the hollow where the lioness lay, a small monitor flickered inside a remote ranger outpost. The image was grainy, washed by heat and distance, but the shapes were unmistakable. A lioness on the ground, a male standing guard, and something about the stillness that didn't belong to a normal birth. Amara noticed it first. She leaned closer to the screen, her breath slowing as she watched the uneven rise of the lioness's chest. She'd seen dozens of labors from afar. Most resolved themselves before intervention was ever considered. This one wasn't resolving. The pauses were wrong. The stillness was wrong. She keyed the radio, her voice calm but tight. "We may have a critical labor situation. Adult female. Signs of collapse. Male present." The reply came back without hesitation. "Confirm visual distress?" "Yes," Amara said. "And it's getting worse." Out on the savannah, the sound of engines carried faintly on the wind. Not loud, not fast, careful. A single vehicle crested the rise and slowed, tires crunching softly over dry earth. It stopped well short of the hollow, respecting a distance learned through years of survival. Kahlo heard it. His head snapped up. Muscles rippled beneath his coat as instinct surged. Protect, defend, drive away. This was the moment when kings usually roared, but Kahlo didn't. He stood between the sound and the lioness, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the vehicle. The engine idled. No doors opened. No one rushed forward. The humans waited. Seconds stretched. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Kahlo shifted his weight and stepped aside. Not away from her, just enough to reveal her. It wasn't surrender. It was something far more dangerous. Allowance. Amara opened the door and stepped out, moving with deliberate slowness. Her hands stayed visible. Her eyes stayed low. Every step was a negotiation with instinct, hers and his. She stopped the moment Kahlo's tail flicked, waiting until it stilled again. The lioness lay motionless now, her breathing shallow and irregular. Amara didn't need instruments to see it. Time was slipping. She looked at Kahlo, not as a threat, not as an animal, but as a guardian who had run out of options. "We're here to help," she said softly, knowing tone mattered more than words. Kahlo didn't move, but he didn't advance either. That was the line. Once crossed, there would be no turning back. If they stepped in and failed, the cost would be absolute. If they stepped in and succeeded, it would be because trust, fragile and unspoken, had been granted in the narrowest space between fear and hope. Amara nodded to her team. They were going in, and somewhere between the idling engine and the shallow breaths in the sand, the story shifted. From waiting to action, from instinct to decision, from what nature usually allows to what it almost never does. They moved carefully, as if sound itself could shatter what little remained. Knees pressed into the sand, hands hovered, then steadied. The space around the lioness felt smaller now, tight, fragile, like a room with no walls and no air. Her breathing thinned to threads. One shallow rise, a pause too long, another rise that barely made it back. Amara watched the timing, not with a clock, but with instinct sharpened by years of knowing when seconds mattered. This wasn't sleep. This wasn't rest after effort. This was the dangerous quiet that follows when a body has spent everything it has. Kahlo stayed where he was, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin. His head lowered until his whiskers brushed the sand beside her muzzle. He listened. Not for threats, not for the humans, only for her. The next pause stretched longer than any before. No breath came. For a moment, no one moved. The savannah held its shape, frozen in place, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Even Kahlo didn't react, not with force, not with sound. His body locked, muscles rigid, eyes fixed on the stillness where her chest should have risen. Amara reached forward, then stopped. She had seen this moment before, in animals, in people. The line where intervention comes too late or not at all. She placed her hand against the lioness's side, feeling for movement that wasn't there. Nothing. A low sound escaped Kalo's chest, deep, broken, unfinished. He didn't roar. He didn't lunge. He pressed his forehead briefly to the ground beside her, as if bracing himself against a truth he could feel but didn't yet accept. Then, barely, a breath returned. So faint it could have been imagined. A small lift, a fragile release, enough to keep the moment from closing completely. But it didn't come again. The silence settled back in, heavier now, layered with the knowledge that this was no pause between contractions. This was the edge where bodies slip away without warning. Amara met her team's eyes. No words were needed. Waiting was no longer neutral. Waiting was a decision. Kalo lifted his head slowly. His gaze moved from the lioness to the humans and back again, not with anger, not with challenge, but with something raw and unguarded. The kind of look that forms when instinct runs out of answers. The wind stirred the grass, dust drifted across the ground, and in that suspended space, between one breath that didn't return and a choice that couldn't be undone, the story tightened around a single terrifying truth. If they hesitated now, there would be nothing left to save. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She knew that speed, here, could turn fragile trust into instinctive chaos. Instead, she moved with the careful certainty of someone who understands that miracles are often built from restraint. "Sedation," she said quietly. The syringe appeared in her hand, already prepared. The team adjusted their positions without a word, bodies angled low, movements smooth and deliberate. Kalo watched every shift, every breath, his muscles coiled but still. He stood close enough to feel the air move, far enough not to cross the line he had already drawn. Amara waited for his eyes. For a long moment they held, human and lion, neither yielding, neither challenging. Then Kalo exhaled, slow and heavy, and took a single step back. It was enough. The sedative went in cleanly. The lioness flinched once, then stilled as the drug began its quiet work. Her breathing remained shallow, uneven, but present, just barely. Amara knelt and placed both hands on the lioness's abdomen. She pressed gently, then firmer, reading the story written beneath the skin. What she felt made her jaw tighten. "This isn't just exhaustion," she said. "The position's wrong." The team exchanged a glance. A misalignment during labor was rare and deadly without intervention. Time had already been lost. There would be no transport, no second chance. What happened next would happen here, in the open, under the sun. Tools were laid out on the sand, clean, minimal, enough. Kalo lowered himself to the ground a few meters away, eyes never leaving them. His tail flicked once, twice, then stopped. The world seemed to narrow again, compressing around the circle of hands and breath and effort. Amara worked quickly now, but not frantically. She adjusted, repositioned, guided with precision born of experience. The lioness's body resisted at first, then yielded, just slightly, as if responding to help it had been waiting for. A tense minute passed, then another. "Now," Amara said. There was a sudden shift, subtle, almost invisible, but everyone felt it. Resistance gave way. Space opened where there had been none. A shape emerged, not rushing, not dramatic, just the unmistakable arrival of something that hadn't been able to come before. Amara supported it carefully, clearing the airway, rubbing gently, deliberately. The seconds stretched, heavy with doubt. Then, a movement. Small, weak, real. A sound followed. Thin, breathless, but unmistakably alive. The team released a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Kalo rose in a single fluid motion, stepping closer, eyes locked on the new life in Amara's hands. He didn't roar. He didn't approach. He watched, silent, shaking, as the impossible took shape in front of him. The crisis wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time since the labor began, death was no longer the only thing in the room. The newborn was wrapped quickly, shielded from the heat and the grit of the savannah. Its movements were small and uneven, each breath a fragile promise that needed protection. Amara checked the airway again, then again, careful not to rush hope where caution still mattered. The lioness lay quiet now, sedated but alive. Her breathing, though shallow, had found a rhythm at last. Not strong, not safe, but steady enough to keep the moment open. Kalo remained where he was, a silent presence at the edge of everything. He didn't approach, he didn't retreat. He watched the rise and fall of the cloth around the newborn, his eyes tracking every motion as if memorizing proof that this was real. His tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, then went still. The team worked efficiently, speaking only when needed. Fluids, monitoring, Shade improvised from what little they had. This wasn't a victory yet, only a pause in the fall, the kind that demands patience more than celebration. Amara glanced toward Kalo. The space between them felt different now, less charged, more measured. Not trust exactly, something quieter, an understanding shaped by what had already been risked. They prepared the transfer. The lioness needed care that couldn't be given here. The newborn, too fragile to be left exposed, was secured close, warmth maintained, movement minimized. The engine started softly, like a question rather than a command. Kalo stood as the vehicle shifted. He followed a few steps, then stopped. The distance held. He didn't block the path. He didn't challenge the machine carrying his world away. He simply watched until it disappeared beyond the rise. Time passed. Hours blurred into a long stretch of waiting, first under the open sky, then beyond it. At the care site, the lioness slept and stirred. The newborn breathed and faltered, then breathed again. Each small success reset the clock. Back on the savannah, Kalo returned to the hollow. He lay where she had been, the sand still warm with memory. He listened to the land as dusk settled, the air cooling, the sounds returning one by one. Night came without answers, but it came without loss. And for Kalo, that was enough, for now. Dawn arrived without announcement, spreading a pale, cautious light across the savannah. The night had passed, not without fear, but without loss. The air felt lighter now, cooler, as if the land itself had exhaled. The vehicle slowed where the grass opened into familiar ground. Movements were careful, quiet, the kind that respects what it's returning. The lioness was lowered first. She stirred as the last traces of sedation faded, her breathing steady enough to carry her weight. Not strong, but real. Then the newborn, warm, alive, breathing on its own. From the edge of the clearing, Kalo emerged. He didn't rush forward. He didn't call out. He stood perfectly still, watching, every muscle held in restraint, like a force choosing not to be used. The lioness lifted her head. Recognition came slowly, then all at once. She shifted, drawing the small, fragile body closer. The newborn answered with a faint movement, a sound so soft it barely disturbed the morning. Kalo stepped forward, once, then again. He lowered his head between them, touching the ground, not to claim, not to demand, but to accept. No triumph, no display, just presence. The circle closed quietly, the way it was always meant to. The humans stayed back. This wasn't their moment anymore. There were no guarantees waiting beyond the next sunrise. The savannah would remain unforgiving. Survival would still demand everything it always had. But for now, life had been given space to continue, without interference. Amara watched from a distance, hands empty. Her work was finished. What remained belonged to the wild. Kalo settled beside his family, steady and silent. The sun climbed higher, shadows shortened. The land resumed its rhythm, and somewhere between what nearly ended and what was allowed to begin again, a simple truth remained. Sometimes, the wild doesn't need to be saved. It only needs to be respected. If stories like this matter to you, Staying connected helps more of them be told.